These reptiles, which ruled the Earth for 160 million years, were direct descendants of those first creatures that survived the catastrophe. Without that period when nature experimented with the sizes and shapes of life, we would never have seen those incredible beings that became symbols of the prehistoric era. 300 million years ago, our planet was completely unrecognizable. Imagine a world where instead of familiar trees, giant horsetails grew as tall as a 10-story building. These plants covered vast areas and created real green forests where unusual creatures lived. Giant centipedes, as large as a baseball bat, crawled through the marshes, hunting small animals, and even their own kin. What is even more shocking, these centipedes could reach lengths of up to a meter, and their bodies were covered with a hard shell that protected them from predators. At the same time, dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters, which exceeded the size of some modern birds, flew through the skies. The Earth's atmosphere was saturated with oxygen to 35%, which is twice as much as today. Such a high level of oxygen allowed giant insects to survive and grow to unprecedented sizes. These conditions created an ideal environment for the diversity of life, which we can only dream of. But that's not the most strange thing. These forests were also home to creatures like crocodile-sized amphibians that sloshed through the marshes, making sounds like dull thuds. Now imagine that on land, reptiles dominated, which would later become the ancestors of dinosaurs. But before these giants appeared, Earth had to go through an entire epoch of changes. The periods of the Carboniferous and Permian became the stage for the struggle for survival, where each new species tried to find its place in the ecosystem. Nevertheless, the harsh struggle for resources led to the fact that around 250 million years ago, one of the largest mass extinctions in Earth's history occurred. More than 95% of all life forms disappeared, leaving behind emptiness that was later filled by dinosaurs. And you know what's the craziest thing? These ancient forests with their giant plants and monsters were just the beginning of a history that would lead to the appearance of completely new forms of life on our planet. Imagine a world where the climate resembles eternal summer. Temperatures fluctuated around 30 degrees Celsius, and humidity reached 90%. These were tropics without seasons, where rain fell almost daily, and the sun shone brightly, like on the best resorts. In such conditions, giant forests grew, composed of plants reaching 30 meters in height. Mossy ferns with their wide leaves were as large as modern cars, and tree-like horsetails reaching heights of 15 meters created a real green canopy overhead. And picture this. Under this canopy, animals thrived that we can only imagine today. The humid atmosphere fostered abundant vegetation, which in turn allowed various forms of life to flourish. Insects crawled on the ground with wingspans exceeding 60 centimeters. Have you ever seen a dragonfly that could fly like modern birds? These were true giants that dominated their ecosystems. And what about reptiles? Lizards as long as a person hunted smaller creatures using their sharp teeth and agility. But that's not the most unusual thing. In these conditions, amphibians the size of crocodiles could exist, swimming in rivers and lakes filled with oxygen, twice as much as today's levels. How is that possible? The oxygen level in the atmosphere reached 35%. This created ideal conditions not only for the growth of vegetation, but also for the survival and growth of all animals. But what's even more astonishing? These tropics were home to the first ancestors of mammals just beginning to develop. They hid under leaves, hunting invertebrates, and perhaps even dreamed of the day when they could take their place under the sun in this extraordinary world. And this is just the beginning of a story that will lead to the appearance of entirely new forms of life on our planet. The level of oxygen in the atmosphere reached 35%, and this changed everything we know about life on Earth. Imagine how easy it would be to breathe. Every breath would provide more oxygen than it does now. This created ideal conditions for plant growth, with plants becoming true giants. Some trees reached heights of 100 meters, like modern 20-story buildings. But that's not all. Due to the high concentration of oxygen, some insects could grow to sizes that seem fantastical today. Dragonflies with wingspans of 75 centimeters, like small birds. How was this possible? The key lies in the fact that vegetation actively absorbed carbon dioxide and released oxygen, creating powerful forests filled with giant ferns and conifers. These forests, in essence, were the lungs of the planet, and they were responsible for such high oxygen levels. But what else happened during this time? Large reptiles, such as the ancestors of dinosaurs, began hunting these giant insects using their size and agility. Their jaws were powerful, and they could easily handle such prey. But this is not the most amazing part. It was in these conditions that the first giant amphibians appeared, capable of reaching lengths of up to 3 meters, like modern crocodiles. But how did they survive in conditions that were changing so rapidly? The secret lay in their ability to adapt to various habitats and hunt their competitors using their speed and strength. What's even more astonishing? These amphibians were not the only giants that dominated the planet. At this time, there were also other incredible creatures, such as ancient reptiles and even primitive mammals, which began to show signs of evolution. How did they survive in conditions of high competition and a changing environment? The answer to this question may open the door to even more fascinating mysteries of our past. Giant lepidodendrons were true monsters of their time, reaching heights of 30 and even 40 meters. Imagine a forest where each tree, like a skyscraper, towered above the rest of the vegetation. The trunks of these giants could have a diameter of up to 2 meters. It would be like trying to hug a tree, but you wouldn't have enough arms to reach around it. Lepidodendrons didn't just exist in these forests. They dominated the landscapes, creating dense thickets that were home to a multitude of diverse forms of life. Their leaves were needle-like, reaching lengths of up to 40 centimeters, allowing them to efficiently capture sunlight. But that's not all. Their roots grew so deep that they could reach more than 10 meters in length, providing them with secure anchorage in the soil and stability in strong winds. How could they survive in such an aggressive environment? The answer lay in their highly efficient photosynthesis, which was further enhanced by the high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, enabling them to grow at record speeds. But that's not the most astonishing part. Lepidodendrons reproduced using spores that were so large that their diameter could reach 10 centimeters. These spores, like tiny parachutes, were carried by the wind over vast distances, facilitating the colonization of new territories. And here's where it gets truly incredible. Some of these ferns could live up to 1,000 years, placing them among the oldest trees on the planet. What's even more astonishing? While lepidodendrons were growing, their forests created a unique ecosystem where insects the size of pigeons, yes, you heard it right, thrived. These giant insects hunted smaller creatures, creating true predatory chains that altered our understanding of nature at the time. Thus, in these forests dominated by lepidodendrons, life was teeming with an unprecedented level of energy and diversity, and we continue to uncover new facts about how they influenced the climate and ecosystems of their era. The trunks of ancient lepidodendrons could reach heights of up to 30 meters, and their surfaces were marked by characteristic rhombic scars left by fallen leaves. These scars, like the remnants of torn fabric, created a unique pattern that captivated researchers studying fossilized remains. Each leaf, as it fell, left its mark, and over time the trunks of these giants resembled a complex mosaic where each detail told a story. But this is not the most unusual thing. Imagine that such trees could exist in conditions that today seem impossible. Their roots, extending deeply into the earth, helped retain moisture essential for survival in tropical conditions with high humidity. Inside the trunks were vessels that transported water and nutrients, allowing this species to dominate the ecosystems of the time. Did you know that lepidodendrons were part of vast forests that stretched for thousands of kilometers? These forests were not only homes for numerous animals and insects, but also influenced the climate, contributing to the formation of oxygen in the atmosphere. Moreover, some of them could grow on boggy soils where other plants simply couldn't survive. Their wood was hard and strong, enabling them to withstand strong winds, which were not uncommon in such forests. But wait, that's not all. Some scientists claim that lepidodendrons could produce special chemical compounds that protected them from pests. These substances might have been so effective that they allowed the trees to survive even in conditions of intense resource competition. The most incredible thing is that some of these trees could live for several hundred years, witnessing incredible changes in their surroundings. For example, their seeds, the size of a pea, could travel long distances, spreading life and creating new forests in other regions. Now imagine trunks covered in rhombic scars, 30 meters tall, and all this in conditions where the oxygen content was twice as high as now. Breathing was like in the tropics. Giant calamites reaching heights of 20 meters were true monsters of their time, and the reason for their growth is indeed remarkable. These plants, resembling bamboo, had stiff stems that were not only strong but also light due to their porous structure, allowing them to quickly reach the sunlight. Their root system was powerful and extensive, anchoring the plants in the soil and providing them with necessary nutrients. Now imagine this. In conditions of high humidity and abundant carbon dioxide, their growth accelerated to incredible speeds. Each year, calamites could grow up to 1 meter in height, making them some of the tallest plants of their time. It's interesting that such conditions facilitated not only vertical, but also horizontal expansion. The ferns could form entire forests where one plant would intertwine with another, creating dense thickets similar to modern tropical jungles. But that's not all. Calamites had the ability to reproduce vegetatively, allowing them to occupy new territories and displace other plant species. A curious fact, their spores, the size of a pea, could be carried over long distances, ensuring the colonization of new lands. Now imagine these bamboo forests as homes for various creatures, from giant insects to early amphibians that used them as shelter. And what's even more astonishing, these ferns literally breathed in an atmosphere where the oxygen level exceeded 30%, allowing many animals to grow to enormous sizes. Giant tree-like ferns known as Sorionuses could reach heights of up to 12 meters and served as homes for numerous forest inhabitants. Their root systems were not only massive, but also lay on the surface, forming intricate, intertwined structures that could hold water like a sponge. These roots, resembling stiff tentacles, not only anchored the ferns in the soil, but also provided necessary support for their giant leaves, which could reach lengths of up to 7 meters. Imagine a forest where each leaf is a true green parachute, capturing sunlight and converting it into vital energy. With a complex photosynthesis system, these ferns released oxygen into the atmosphere, contributing to the survival of other organisms. And now comes the truly extraordinary. The roots of Sorionuses could sense changes in their environment, adapting to different humidity and temperature conditions, allowing them to survive even in the most unfavorable situations. But that's not all. These ferns didn't just grow, they reproduced through spores that weighed only a few milligrams but could travel vast distances with the wind. What's even more astonishing, these spores could remain viable for thousands of years, even in seemingly inhospitable conditions. This ensured the continuous regeneration of Sorionuses on Earth until they were displaced by more modern plants. Your imagination can picture a green army once dominating the planet, creating entire forests filled with the roars of ancient animals and the rustling of leaves by giant insects. But did you know that some of these ferns could live up to 100 years? Yes, they were true long livers, capable of witnessing climate and environmental changes over entire epochs. In the heart of these forests, the chordates, ancestors of today's coniferous trees, reigned, forming the first true forests on Earth. Imagine forests where each tree could reach heights of up to 45 meters, with trunks as thick as a car. These plants not only dominated ecosystems but also played a crucial role in shaping the atmosphere by releasing oxygen, which was twice as much as today. Did you know that chordates could thrive in conditions we now call extreme? They were not deterred by heat or moisture and could survive even on poor soils, allowing them to colonize vast territories. But what is truly astonishing, chordates had a unique ability to vegetatively reproduce, enabling them to recover from natural disasters. This allowed them to regenerate forests in just a few years, a process that would take decades today. And here's where it gets really incredible. Their leaves were as large as a human hand and had a shape that maximized sunlight absorption. But what's even more shocking, these trees could produce seeds weighing up to 30 grams. Imagine their chances of survival. These seeds could travel great distances, facilitating the spread of chordates across the planet. Moreover, chordates laid the foundation for the formation of coal deposits that now power our energy. Their wood was strong and durable, making it ideal for construction. Now imagine forests filled with these giants, stretching across thousands of kilometers. Each chordate in this forest was not just a tree, but an entire ecosystem, home to unique insects and animals that depended on these plants. These forests were true centers of life, leaving their mark on the geological history of our planet. It's fascinating that chordates not only preceded modern coniferous trees, but also many contemporary plant species we know today. Their genes hold secrets that scientists are still trying to unravel, studying their impact on climate and ecosystems. There are even findings suggesting that their wood could have been used to create the first tools and implements, placing chordates among humanity's most significant achievements. And the most incredible part, chordates in essence laid the groundwork for the forests we see today, and their legacy lives on in every coniferous tree growing on our planet. Imagine a world where plants grow to heights of 30 meters and their leaves cover the entire landscape like giant umbrellas. This was not just an extraordinary landscape, it was a result of the atmosphere containing 35% oxygen, twice as much as today. How is this possible? The high level of oxygen allowed plants to actively absorb carbon dioxide and grow at an incredible speed. What's even more astonishing, these giants, such as lycopods and sigillarias, could reach enormous sizes thanks to this oxygen abundance and the absence of significant pests that could threaten their growth. While insects were just beginning to appear on Earth, most of them couldn't compete with these massive forms of life. This created ideal conditions for their existence. How did these plants sustain their lives in such a dense atmosphere? Their roots grew several meters deep, absorbing water and nutrients, allowing them to survive even in the darkness of the lower forest levels. But this is not the most peculiar thing. What if you found out that some of these plants could grow to the size of a modern bus? Their trunks were so massive that several people were needed to encircle them. Another interesting fact, while we are accustomed to seeing wood with a characteristic texture, the bark of these giants was hard and thick, protecting them from potential threats from animals that had not yet evolved into effective herbivores. And now comes the truly bizarre. How large were the biomasses of such forests? At their peak, these ecosystems could contain up to 30 tons of wood per hectare, 10 times more than in today's tropical forests. Each tree served as a home for numerous forms of life that were completely dependent on these giant plants. But what happens when such giants disappear? What's the most astonishing thing? This process led to the formation of coal, which we now use as a source of energy. These plants did not just exist, they changed the entire planet, leaving behind a legacy that we still feel today. Imagine a forest where each tree reaches a height of 30 meters, and their trunks are entwined with vines, as in a tropical paradise. In such swampy forests, there is constant humidity, reaching 90%, and the temperature never drops below 20 degrees Celsius. The dense vegetation creates an atmosphere where sunlight filters through the thick canopy of green leaves, casting mysterious shadows on the ground. But that's not all. Beneath this vegetation lies a world teeming with life, where every drop of water becomes a home for countless creatures. Do you know what inhabits such conditions? Giant insects the size of a pigeon crawl across the ground, using their sharp spines for protection against predators. Moss and algae covering the surface were not just decorations. They played a crucial role in the ecosystem, absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. In such a forest, you might see giant trellises reaching up to 8 meters in length, unfurling their leaves with agility in the low light. And now imagine that in this environment there were also amphibians the size of a crocodile, splashing through the swamps, their loud cries merging with the rustling of leaves. These forests were not just habitats, they were arenas for survival, where every creature fought for its place in the sun. But what's even more astonishing, these ecosystems were so rich that they contained plants that could grow to the size of a bus. Imagine them occupying vast areas with their roots penetrating the soft, nutrient-rich mud, creating true jungles in the swamps. Around them, not only insects, but also small reptiles hunted their prey, hiding under the dense foliage. And here's where it gets really extraordinary. In such conditions, even ancient reptiles could exist, growing to the size of modern crocodiles. As humidity and temperature remained stable, flora and fauna adapted to these conditions, creating an astonishing diversity of life forms. But how is this possible? The secret lies in the fact that the amount of carbon in the atmosphere was twice as much as it is now, allowing plants to grow faster and reach incredible sizes. These forests were indeed the lungs of the planet, producing 35% of the oxygen we breathe today. Millions of years ago, when forests covered vast territories, decaying plants began to transform into what we now know as coal. Imagine this: billions of tons of vegetation buried in swamps where a lack of oxygen created perfect conditions for the preservation of organic matter. This means that instead of completely decomposing, plants began to slowly transform into coal, retaining their structure. How did this happen? As layers of sediment accumulated, pressing down on the underlying plant remains, temperature and pressure gradually increased. This process, known as coalification, took millions of years. It is important to note that coal was not formed from any plant material, but primarily from special types of plants such as ferns and horsetails, which were widespread at that time. They had a high carbon content, making them ideal candidates for future coal deposits. Now imagine this: layers of coal located up to 7 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface could fill entire cities. But that's not all. When these coal layers were subjected to high temperatures and pressure, they were divided into different types: anthracite, bituminous coal, and lignite, each with unique properties and uses. For example, anthracite, which contains up to 90% carbon, would be ideal fuel for industrial plants. But how is all this connected to the present? In our time, coal remains one of the main sources of energy, despite its impact on the climate. In some countries, coal makes up more than 40% of all energy sources. And what's even more interesting, in recent years, scientists have begun to develop technologies that can extract coal from old deposits that were previously considered unsuitable for mining. This opens up new horizons for energy, but also raises questions about the future of our planet. So what does the future hold for coal in the next century? Ancient forests that once filled the planet were not just beautiful pockets of nature, they became the foundation for the formation of coal, which we use today. How does this work? When trees reaching heights of 30 meters fell and were submerged in bogs, they did not decompose as we are accustomed to seeing. Instead, a layer of peat formed on them, which, under the influence of pressure and temperature, transformed into coal. This process, known as coalification, takes millions of years and requires specific conditions. It is important to understand that the vegetation of that time was incredibly diverse, from giant ferns to coniferous trees, some of which reached a diameter of 1 meter. Now imagine the carbon footprint of these plants became the basis for the coal seams we find today. Each centimeter of coal can form over thousands of years, and this is not just coal, but the result of complex biochemical processes. There are several stages of coalification. First, peat forms, then lignite, followed by brown coal, and finally, anthracite, the most valuable and high-quality type of coal. Isn't it amazing? The coal we find can contain up to 70% carbon, making it an excellent source of energy. But why is this period called the Carboniferous? Simply because during this time, vast quantities of coal accumulated, which later became the foundation for our industrialization. Scientific research shows that in some places coal seams can reach a thickness of 200 meters. This means that beneath our feet lie entire worlds that were once green forests teeming with life. These coal deposits are not just a geological resource, but also a clue about how life on Earth has changed over millions of years. In some regions, scientists find coal that has preserved traces of ancient plants, allowing us to look back in time and understand which species dominated then. And the question remains, how will coal continue to influence our future? Imagine forests where dragonflies the size of sparrows not only fly, but dominate the air with a wingspan of 70 centimeters. These giant insects, known as meganeuras, were true monsters of their time, hunting small reptiles and other insects with their razor-sharp jaws. How could they survive in conditions where oxygen levels were over 30%? Their respiratory system was significantly more efficient than that of modern dragonflies. They could absorb much more oxygen, allowing them to develop incredible speed and agility. But what is even more astonishing? Meganeuras had complex eyes composed of more than 24,000 individual lenses, providing them with nearly a full 360-degree view. These insects could detect even the slightest movements, making them perfect predators. But how did they reproduce? Females laid eggs in water bodies, where larvae, known as naiads, could grow to sizes comparable to small fish and hunt other aquatic creatures. These larvae were true killers. They could remain underwater for several years before transforming into adult dragonflies ready for flight. Now, imagine them surviving among dense vegetation and hunting their prey with their extraordinary abilities. Giant dragonflies were not just part of the ecosystem, they were at the top of the food chain, and their disappearance remains a mystery for scientists. But what is the most fascinating? Scientific research shows that climate changes that occurred over the following millions of years were responsible for their extinction. Their place was taken by smaller insects that could adapt to the new conditions. But what were the consequences of their disappearance for the ecosystem as a whole? Imagine a centipede that could reach a length of up to 2.5 meters. This is not science fiction, but a reality that existed on Earth during the Carboniferous period. Arthroptera was a true giant among arthropods, and its size is still impressive. A length of up to 2.5 meters made it the largest terrestrial arthropod in history. Consider this. While modern centipedes rarely exceed 30 centimeters, this ancient specimen could crawl across the land like a small reptile. How did it manage to survive in conditions where the air contained 35% oxygen, which is twice as much as today? This created ideal conditions for the growth of giant insects and centipedes, providing them with the necessary amount of oxygen for metabolism. Arthroptera hunted small animals, using its sharp spines for defense and capturing prey, making it a dangerous predator. And what is even more intriguing, its legs were not only long but also powerful, allowing it to move quickly across various landscapes, from wet swamps to dense forests. Do you know what else is shocking? Scientists suggest that such sizes could be a result of the absence of mammals capable of competing for resources at that time. How could such a centipede exist in conditions where tropical forests filled with vegetation dominated the Earth? The secret lay in its ability to adapt to the diverse ecosystems that thrived then. Picture forests where each tree was the size of a 10-story building, and beneath them crawled such giants as Arthroptera. And even more fascinating, these centipedes reproduced by spores that were the size of a tennis ball. This not only shocks but also makes one think about how much the ecosystems have changed over millions of years. Furthermore, their existence opens new horizons for understanding how evolution could shape life on the planet. And the most amazing thing? Scientists continue to find fossilized remains that challenge all our notions about the development of life on Earth. Oxygen, which was twice as abundant as it is today, opened doors to an incredible evolution of insects. Imagine a world where dragonflies have wingspans of 75 centimeters and centipedes crawl along like baseball bats. This is not science fiction. Such sizes were possible due to the high level of oxygen, which made up 35% of the atmosphere. This meant that the respiratory systems of insects, which were already quite complex, received much more oxygen than modern species. As a result, they could grow to sizes that seem unimaginable today. For example, some dragonfly species could have wingspans over a meter. But that's not the most bizarre part. Scientists suggest that due to the increased oxygen content, insects could thrive in conditions where their metabolism worked at its limits. How did they survive in such conditions? The secret lay in their ability to easily adapt to various ecosystems. In dense forests filled with giant trees reaching heights of 30 meters, insects found ideal conditions for hunting and reproduction. Humidity reaching 90% promoted the active growth of vegetation, creating abundant food sources. Picture how giant amphibians the size of crocodiles sloshed through marshes, while aerial predators with wingspans over a meter soared above them. And the most astonishing part? These giants reproduced with spores the size of tennis balls, allowing them to quickly colonize new territories. As the oxygen level began to decrease, the world of insects began to change. Climate changes and deteriorating living conditions led to the extinction of many of these large species. However, even today, studying fossil remains, scientists continue to find new evidence of how distant ancestors could adapt and survive in conditions that seem extreme today. Each new discovery opens new horizons for understanding the biology and ecology of that era. For example, recent research has shown that some insects could crawl on trees the size of a 10-story building, using their size to fight for survival. Unpredictable climate changes and oxygen levels influenced the evolution not only of insects, but of the entire ecosystem. It's fascinating to think about the amazing discoveries that await us as we explore these ancient worlds. Giant cockroaches known as Archimylocris, which inhabited ancient forests, could reach the size of a rat, as evidenced by the discovery of their fossilized remains. These creatures, up to 30 centimeters long, had powerful wings and strong legs, enabling them to easily move along vines and trees that were as tall as a 10-story building. Imagine them spreading their wings, creating a sound similar to the rustling of leaves as they flew from tree to tree in search of food. Scientists suggest that these cockroaches hunted smaller insects and possibly even other invertebrates, using their sharp mandibles to tear apart their prey. However, what is most remarkable about Archimylocris is their ability to survive in conditions of high humidity and abundant oxygen, which made up around 35% of the air. This level of oxygen allowed even such creatures as cockroaches to reach enormous sizes, something that would be impossible today. Since they lived in dense forests, their color palette ranged from deep browns to bright greens, helping them blend in with the foliage. And what's even more astonishing, these insects not only survived but also reproduced in ideal conditions, forming entire colonies with hundreds of individuals. Paleontologists find fossilized remains of these colonies where Archimylocris interacted with each other, forming complex social structures. Their ecology was so intricate that some species could develop symbiotic relationships with other insects, allowing them to survive in competitive conditions. But that's not the most peculiar thing. It turns out that some Archimylacris had the ability to glow, which could be used to attract mates or deter predators. Imagine illuminated forests where these giants flicker like living fireflies among the greenery. Considering all these facts, it becomes clear that life in those times was much more diverse and extraordinary than we can imagine. And as we picture this ancient ecosystem, we are left with the question, what other mysteries lie hidden beneath the layers of Earth, waiting to be uncovered by scientists? Scorpions called Pulmonoscorpii, which inhabited these ancient ecosystems, could reach lengths of up to 70 centimeters. Imagine them crawling through moist tropical forests, leaving tracks in soft soil. These creatures were not just large, they were true predators of their time, with powerful pincers capable of crushing prey. Their bodies were covered in a hard exoskeleton that protected them from predators and allowed them to survive in conditions of high competition. Scientific research shows that Pulmonoscorpii, unlike ordinary scorpions, breathed not only with their lungs but also through special structures resembling gills, which enabled them to survive in low-oxygen environments. But what is truly astonishing, their respiratory system allowed them to hunt even in the deepest bodies of water where other predators could not survive. Scientists suggest that these scorpions could spend much of their lives in water, which was unique for their species. And here's something even more remarkable. Pulmonoscorpii hunted fish, using their pincers and quick movements to catch their prey. Imagine them surviving in this harsh world, surrounded by other predators like amphibians the size of crocodiles. Their adaptability was key to their survival in these conditions. And that's not all. Their large eyes provided excellent night vision, allowing them to hunt in the dark when competitors were already asleep. Fossils found in various parts of the world show that Pulmonoscorpii were among the most dominant predators of their time. These discoveries give us a glimpse into what life was like in those distant times. And here's the craziest part. These scorpions could reproduce in water, laying eggs in protected places to ensure the safety of their offspring. When we think about such predators, we realize that the world of ancient oceans and forests was full of surprises, and each discovery adds another layer to this fascinating story. Now imagine all this happening at the same time when giants like insects with wingspans of over a meter and reptiles that dominated the land also existed on Earth. At that time, there were no large vertebrates on Earth capable of controlling the sizes of arthropods, which created a unique ecosystem. Imagine a world where centipedes almost 3 meters long crawled under your feet, and ants reached the size of a fist. And that's where it gets really interesting. The absence of large predators was due to the peculiarities of the climate and ecosystem. Temperatures reached 35 degrees Celsius, and the oxygen level in the atmosphere fluctuated around 35%, more than today. The increased oxygen level allowed insects and other arthropods to reach enormous sizes, but for vertebrate predators, this posed serious problems. Their respiratory systems couldn't function adequately in such conditions, and they couldn't compete with these giants. What's even more shocking, during this period, tropical rainforests dominated where life teemed in every corner, but there were no reptiles that could take the role of predators. The largest predatory vertebrates, like ancient amphibians, did not exceed 2 meters in length. This created a unique situation, a world where insects were at the top of the food chain and predators couldn't hunt them. The inability of large predators to dominate the ecosystem led to insects not only surviving, but also developing, reaching sizes that seem fantastic today. How is this possible? It is related to the fact that in the absence of large predators, there are usually many small ecological niches that are filled by various species. As a result, the diversity of life forms significantly increased. For example, some dragonfly species inhabited these forests and had a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters. Yes, you heard it right. They were larger than some modern birds, but that's not all. There were even giant sea spiders that could reach a diameter of more than 30 centimeters. They swam in warm waters hunting fish and had no competitors due to the absence of large marine predators. This created a whole world where large vertebrates had no chance of survival in the face of rapidly developing arthropods. The question arises, how is all this connected to the disappearance of these giants? The answer is shocking and leads us to other fascinating aspects of the ecosystem. Scientific research shows that changes in climate and fluctuations in atmospheric oxygen levels ultimately led to these giant insects losing their advantages. As the oxygen level decreased, their sizes began to decrease, and they could no longer dominate. And while some species disappeared, others evolved in new conditions. This process of change has not stopped and continues to this day, creating new ecosystems and shaping life on the planet. But what is even more amazing? Geologists have found traces of ancient ecosystems that can tell us even more about what happened in those distant times when the world was completely different. Among the first amphibians to colonize new ecosystems were the Aeropods and Diplocaulus, whose sizes were truly astonishing. Aeropods could reach lengths of up to 2 meters and had distinctive long legs, allowing them to move both on land and in water. Imagine them crawling along wet shores, catching fish with their sharp teeth, perfectly suited for hunting small aquatic creatures. What is truly remarkable is that unlike modern amphibians, these creatures had a hard shell that protected them from predators and helped retain moisture. Diplocaulus, on the other hand, were true giants, reaching lengths of up to 3 meters. Their bodies were covered in thick scales that provided protection from the environment. What is even more fascinating is that these amphibians actively hunted other animals, using their powerful jaws to tear apart their prey. They not only survived but dominated their ecosystems, allowing them to successfully compete with reptiles. Around these amphibians, life thrived. Their presence attracted a variety of insects, and they themselves became food for larger predators. But that's not all. Research shows that Diplocaulus developed unique adaptations that allowed them to breathe both in water and on land, a capability that could have led to further evolutionary changes. Picture these ancient water bodies teeming with life as Aeropods and Diplocaulus fought for resources and territory, creating a genuine struggle for survival. And what's most intriguing, their fossilized remains have been found on all continents, indicating that they were true travelers of their time. Eogurinus was a true monster of its time, reaching lengths of up to 4.5 meters, comparable to the size of a small car. It was not just a giant amphibian, but the apex predator in its ecosystems, hunting fish and other aquatic creatures. Imagine fins that could swing like those of modern sharks, and a powerful jaw with teeth as large as a human finger, capable of crushing its prey. But there's more. Eogurinus had a unique ability. Its lungs could adapt to different levels of oxygen in the water, allowing it to stay submerged for long periods without surfacing. What's even more astonishing, this amphibian could move on land using its limbs like modern lizards, giving us insight into the evolution of the first terrestrial animals. Research shows that Eogurinus survived in conditions where the oxygen level in the atmosphere reached 35%, twice as much as today. This allowed it to be not only a predator, but also a highly resilient creature. But how did it become so large? The answer lies in an extraordinary ecosystem where carbon and oxygen levels permitted the existence of giant organisms. In the swamps where it lived, creatures the size of small crocodiles also roamed. Eogerinus could swim to depths of up to 10 meters, hiding among dense water plants that reached heights of 3 meters. These plants provided it with cover and food. But what's truly remarkable is that its fossil remains have been found not only in North America but also in Europe, indicating its wide distribution. Scientists believe that such living conditions contributed to its adaptation and survival through various climatic changes. And what's even more incredible, Eogerinus could reproduce both on land and in water, making it one of the first creatures to make this transition. Eogerinus became a key link in understanding the evolution of amphibians and their adaptations to life both in water and on land. This leads us to the question, what other remarkable creatures lived in those distant times? Amphibians of that era were not just inhabitants of water bodies, they were tied to them due to specific breeding conditions. Imagine that for successful offspring production, they needed water where they could lay their eggs. These eggs, typically protected by a thin shell, were vulnerable to drying out. Consequently, to prevent offspring loss, adult individuals spent considerable time near water bodies, creating suitable conditions for the development of larvae. These larvae, in turn, were fully aquatic and needed oxygen, which they obtained through gills, not lungs. But that's not all. Some amphibian species, such as ancient salamanders, had a unique ability to metamorphose, allowing them to adapt to life both in water and on land. This remarkable duality of existence required them to constantly be near water bodies, not only for breeding, but also for finding food. What's even more astonishing is that there were species that could move on land but return to water, specifically for breeding, making their dependence on aquatic ecosystems even more apparent. Some researchers even found that despite their adaptations, they couldn't entirely leave the aquatic environment, as this limited their reproductive capabilities. And here's what's fascinating. Due to this dependence on water bodies, they became part of a complex ecosystem where each interaction affected the survival not only of individual species, but of the entire ecosystem. This interdependence was so strong that even changes in water levels could lead to mass extinctions. And now the most incredible part. In some regions, fossilized eggs were found in perfect condition, indicating that ancient amphibians were indeed master builders of their nests, which could protect their offspring even in the most challenging conditions. As amphibians continued to colonize the land, the first reptiles began to appear on the horizon, altering the rules of the game. Their skin, covered in hard scales, could retain moisture, allowing them to survive in conditions that amphibians could not reach. Imagine these ancient creatures, the size of a small crocodile, crawling across the land without fear of drying out in the sun, while their predecessors sought refuge in moist corners. These reptiles did not require constant water for reproduction. Their eggs, protected by a hard shell, could develop in dry conditions, as if nature itself had prepared them for the conquest of new territories. But that's not all. Reptiles had a more efficient respiratory system than amphibians, enabling them to obtain more oxygen necessary for active hunting. And here's where things get really wild. Their jaws were armed with sharp teeth, giving them dominance in the food chain and allowing them to hunt larger animals. And what's even more astonishing, these reptiles began to diversify into different groups, including the ancestors of dinosaurs, leading to the appearance of creatures that would later become true giants. And now imagine species like diapsids, which could reach the size of modern lizards but had a wingspan like a small airplane. Their adaptations, including the ability to regulate body temperature, gave them an advantage in the struggle for survival in a changing climate. And this is just the beginning. In a short time, they will occupy all ecosystems, from moist forests to dry deserts, leading to a true revolution in evolution. These changes laid the foundation for the appearance of new forms of life that would subsequently conquer the entire planet. Each of these creatures opened doors to a world where life could take the most unexpected forms, and this was just the beginning of their great journey. Gillonymus was not just an ancient reptile but a true star of its time, capable of easily outshining many modern lizards. Imagine a creature the size of a lizard, yet with such distinctive features that even the most experienced paleontologists often puzzle over its place in the evolutionary tree. Its length could reach up to 50 centimeters, and its body was covered in small scales that provided protection from predators. But what makes Gillonymus particularly intriguing is that it is believed to have been one of the earliest members of a group known as archosaurs, to which later dinosaurs and crocodiles belonged. This discovery raises numerous questions. How could such a small lizard become the ancestor of such giants? What is even more astonishing, Gillonymus possessed an exceptionally developed respiratory system, allowing it to survive in conditions where oxygen was twice as abundant as it is today. This meant that its organism could efficiently utilize oxygen, giving it an advantage in hunting and evading predators. The appearance of Gillonymus was no less captivating. Its snout resembled a beak, and its teeth were like spikes, enabling it to catch small insects and other invertebrates that formed the basis of its diet. But that's not all. Some findings suggest that Gillonymus could actively climb trees, giving us insight into how it used its skills for hunting and concealment. However, how could such a small lizard survive in a world full of large predators? The answer lies in its ability to camouflage and move quickly. Scientists believe that Gillonymus could change the color of its skin to blend in with its surroundings. If you thought the exotic features of its appearance were the limit, you are mistaken. Gillonymus also had a unique reproductive system. Females laid eggs in nests hidden under leaves, providing protection for their offspring from predators. From an anatomical perspective, its limbs were adapted not only for movement, but also for climbing, making it a versatile creature of its time. And here's where things get really interesting. Gillonymus fossils have been found not only in North America, but also in Europe, challenging our conventional notions of its distribution. How could it migrate over such vast distances in the ancient world? Scientists continue to study its remains, and each time they uncover new details that change our understanding of these reptiles. What is the secret to its survival and migration? One of the most astonishing facts is that Gillonymus may have used the heat from the sun to regulate its body temperature, enabling it to actively hunt even on cold days. Remarkably, its genes carried traits that later allowed its descendants to survive in the most diverse conditions. And what is even more remarkable, Gillonymus could exist in conditions where other species could not, thanks to its ability to adapt. Findings show that it played a key role in the ecosystems of its time, influencing the evolution of other species. The appearance of amniotic eggs in reptiles altered the rules of the evolutionary game and the conquest of land. Imagine an egg encased in a hard shell, providing a safe environment for the embryo to develop, protecting it from external factors such as drying out or predators. These eggs could retain water inside, allowing reptiles to reproduce on land rather than in water, as their ancestors did. And here's the most astonishing part. Reptiles like diapsids began to dominate on land because amniotic eggs allowed them to occupy new niches that were inaccessible to amphibians. Picture these eggs not just protecting the embryos, but also providing the necessary nutrients, creating a sort of ecosystem within. Research shows that such eggs contained albumin, a source of protein, and yolk rich in fats, promoting the growth and development of the embryo. But that's not all. Amniotic eggs significantly increased the chances of offspring survival in conditions where the climate was changing and ecosystems were becoming more diverse. What's even more fascinating, these eggs laid the foundation for the appearance of the first dinosaurs and mammals, leading to further evolution of life forms on the planet. It's worth noting that amniotic eggs could reach sizes up to 30 centimeters in diameter, comparable to the size of some modern ostrich eggs. And what's truly remarkable, thanks to these adaptations, reptiles were able to occupy various ecosystems, from deserts to tropical forests, where they hunted other animals using cunning strategies and intimidating sizes. For example, some of the first large predators, like Archaeopteryx, had a wingspan of up to a meter, making them formidable hunters. Now imagine that reptiles became not only predators, but also prey, and these eggs gave them a chance to survive in complex conditions when larger predators hunted them. Have you ever thought about how such evolution influenced the development of ecosystems as a whole? This opens the door to understanding how life on Earth continued to adapt and change. Let's explore how exactly this influenced the relationships between species and what other amazing facts are hidden in the history of reptiles. Pelycosaurs were remarkable creatures that hunted on Earth with distinctive sails on their backs which could reach heights of 2 meters. These sails served not only for thermoregulation, but also played a crucial role in social behavior. Males would display their sails to attract females, creating a spectacle reminiscent of a modern show featuring vibrant and unusual animals. Their length could reach 4 meters, and they had powerful limbs that allowed them to actively move through forests and marshy areas. But what is truly astonishing is that some pelycosaurs could reach speeds of up to 15 kilometers per hour, which was a remarkable achievement for their size. Their teeth were as sharp as a razor, enabling them to easily tear the flesh of their prey, which included large amphibians and early reptiles. But that's not the most peculiar thing. Pelycosaurs could change their color in response to temperature changes, making them true masters of camouflage. Imagine them hiding among trees and shrubs, changing their color to blend in with their surroundings. Did you know that pelycosaurs were the ancestors of mammals? Traces of their evolution can be seen in the structure of their skulls, which resemble those of modern mammals, but with a unique feature, a bony ridge that served both for protection and for breathing. Thanks to their adaptability, pelycosaurs survived in conditions where the climate was changing and competition with other species was increasing. The secret to their success lay in their ability to use various food sources. While many reptiles hunted large animals, pelycosaurs did not disdain even small insects and vegetation, which allowed them to avoid competition. And the most incredible thing? They could reproduce twice a year, laying up to 100 eggs at a time, giving them a significant advantage in the struggle for survival in a changing world. Dimetrodon, the size of a small car, was not just a lizard, but a true predator that first occupied the top tier of the terrestrial food chain. Imagine it. Its length could reach up to 4 meters, and its massive sail could grow up to 0.5 meter high, creating a mesmerizing sight. But that's not all. Its teeth, resembling sharp knives, were perfect for tearing flesh, allowing it to hunt smaller animals like early reptiles and amphibians. What's truly astonishing is that Dimetrodon was not a dinosaur, but belonged to a group that preceded dinosaurs known as synapsids. How did it become such a successful predator in conditions where competition with other animals was increasing? The secret lay in its ability to adapt to various environmental conditions. Dimetrodon could regulate its body temperature with its sail, which functioned like a solar panel, allowing it to warm up in the sun or cool down in the shade. Moreover, its powerful hind limbs provided excellent speed and maneuverability, making it an ideal hunter. But that's not the most peculiar thing. Dimetrodon could inhabit a variety of ecosystems, from forest areas to open plains, allowing it to occupy numerous niches within the ecosystem. And what's even more astonishing, its closest relatives went extinct, but Dimetrodon left descendants that eventually evolved into mammals. How is that possible? It means that in its genes, there were traits that proved viable over millions of years. Each of its movements was aimed at survival in the face of intense competition, and it was this that made Dimetrodon a symbol of the transition to new forms of life that later dominated our planet. Did you know that its fossils have been found all over the world, from North America to Europe, which confirms its widespread distribution and success in various climatic conditions? Due to rapid climate changes, by the end of this period, the Earth underwent a genuine transformation. Imagine a world where lush, tropical forests, teeming with diverse flora, gave way to drier and hotter conditions. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached nearly 400 parts per million, which is 8 times higher than current levels. This made the climate hotter, and the amount of rainfall significantly decreased, leading to the formation of deserts. What is even more astonishing, in place of dense forests, open spaces began to appear, and it was in these conditions that new plant species emerged, such as seed-bearing plants that could reproduce not only by spores but also by seeds. This was a breakthrough for evolution, as seeds allowed plants to spread over large distances. Now imagine that animals also adapted to these new ecosystems. Many species began to hunt smaller animals, creating new food chains. Insects and other invertebrates dominated these new conditions, reaching sizes that would seem incredible to a modern human. For instance, some could grow up to 80 centimeters in length. Meanwhile, harsh conditions forced many animals to survive, while others sought warmth and food in wetter places like valleys and river deltas. These places became oases of life, where giant reptiles, predecessors of dinosaurs like parasaurs, thrived. These reptiles could reach the size of a car. This transition to harsher conditions was a turning point in evolution. Many species perished, unable to adapt to the changes, while others began to flourish. For example, some of the earliest ancestors of mammals, such as diapsid reptiles, began to occupy new niches, paving the way for the diversity of mammals we know today. But that's not all. There were also giant amphibians, the size of small crocodiles, that hunted their prey in these new ecosystems. They used their strength and speed to dominate in water bodies where the remaining small fish and other aquatic organisms faced real difficulties. Now imagine how these dramatic changes unfolded as the climate shifted with each generation, and how it affected the entire ecosystem. It is interesting to note that during this period, some of the most significant evolutionary changes occurred, which laid the foundation for future forms of life on Earth. Gradual cooling and desiccation of the planet's climate led to significant changes in ecosystems that once thrived. During this period, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dropped 30%, affecting photosynthesis and leading to a reduction in plant biomass. The global ocean began to cool, and the surface temperature decreased by 10 degrees Celsius, creating conditions for the emergence of new climatic zones. Imagine how lush forests with deciduous trees as tall as 30-story buildings gave way to harsher conditions. In these new conditions, survival became a true challenge. Only those species that could adapt to water scarcity and temperature drops continued to exist. And now the most incredible part. During this time, the first dinosaurs appeared on Earth, beginning to occupy the niches left vacant by the extinction of ancient life forms. This transitional phase resulted in a significant enrichment of the ecosystem with new life forms, but also in the disappearance of many species. And what is even more shocking, by the end of this period, the oxygen level in the atmosphere dropped 21%, making breathing a challenge for many creatures. As the climate dried up, it changed so rapidly that plants that once covered the planet faced harsh conditions. Some species could only survive in arid climates, developing hard leaves and deep roots. And here is where it gets truly bizarre. Some of these plants evolved into poisonous forms to protect themselves from herbivores that began hunting them for food. Thus, this period became not only an era of extinction but also a time when life on the planet took on completely new forms. And did you know that at this time there were enormous marine creatures on Earth with lengths reaching 20 meters? These were the predecessors of modern sharks, which dominated the ocean waters, hunting everything they could catch. Changes in climate that occurred in subsequent epochs posed a true challenge for the giant flora that once dominated the Earth. In conditions of heat and humidity where plants grew to sizes we can barely imagine, everything changed. For instance, the height of ancient tree ferns reached 30 meters, and their trunks were so thick that their volume could rival modern cars. But how could such a sudden change occur? By the end of the Permian period, the climate became drier, and many species that once thrived in tropical forests began to go extinct. This extinction affected not only plants but also animals, leading to the disappearance of around 90% of all species on the planet. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. In the absence of dense forests and abundant moisture, new plant species adapted to the changed conditions. One such survivor was the gymnosperm coniferous forest, which began to dominate the land. Conifers like pines and cedars became the foundation of the new ecosystem, adapting to colder and drier climatic conditions. What's most astonishing is that these trees could reach heights of 40 meters and live for more than 1,000 years. This means they could witness the changes in the world around them over immense periods of time. In the face of constant changes, such flora evolved and became a source of oxygen necessary for the survival of the remaining animal species. For example, pines produced resins that not only protected them from pests, but also helped retain moisture in the soil. Each such tree could produce up to 30 kilograms of resin per year. This created entire ecosystems where various organisms found their place. But the story doesn't end there. With the development of these coniferous forests, new animal species emerged that began to prey on the survivors. For instance, the first herbivores, such as Dinosauroses, began to explore new ecosystems, and their sizes were impressive. They could reach 2 meters in height. They consumed conifer needles, allowing them to survive in conditions where other species could not adapt. It's interesting to note that these changes in plant life served as a catalyst for further animal evolution, raising many questions about how life in such conditions could lead to the emergence of new forms. How did those that couldn't adapt survive? The secret lay in the fact that the new conditions required a new strategy for survival. Changes in climate and ecosystems have become a catastrophic factor for giant horsetails and ferns that dominated the vegetation. Imagine these plants, once majestic and powerful, experiencing pressure as temperatures rose by 9 degrees Celsius. This is not just a number. This temperature difference caused wet tropical forests to dry out and soils to lose nutrients. Have you ever thought about how such a global change could affect life? The entire ecosystem was threatened. Species that couldn't adapt to the new conditions began to go extinct. What's truly shocking is that among the extinct plants were those that had existed for millions of years. For example, horsetails that once reached heights of 20 meters and formed dense thickets are now victims of drought and competition with more change-tolerant species. Meanwhile, flowering plants emerged, not only dominating ecosystems but also putting pressure on horsetails and ferns. What's even more shocking? These flowering plants had much more effective mechanisms for reproduction and seed dispersal, allowing them to occupy new niches in the ecosystem and displace ancient species. And here's where it gets really crazy. As a result of this mass extinction which affected almost all species, including giant amphibians and reptiles, ecosystems began to change so that some of them will never recover. And now imagine that not only plants but also animals that depended on them suffered. Yes, giant lizards and other mammals that hunted these giants also faced food shortages. If you thought that was amazing, consider this. The role of volcanic activity during this period should not be underestimated. Volcanic eruptions released massive amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere, further exacerbating climate changes. These events led to the appearance of acid rain, which destroyed soil and worsened conditions for plant growth. Thus, the once flourishing and diverse ecosystem gradually turned into a barren space where survival became a real challenge. Giant horsetails and ferns, once symbols of nature's power, now exist only as fossils telling their story. And the craziest thing? Some scientists claim that this extinction was a harbinger of what awaits Earth in the future when the climate changes again. As the world continued to change, the first true coniferous trees began to appear on the horizon. Imagine forests where trees stood like living towers, reaching heights of up to 30 meters. These conifers, such as araucarias and pine trees, began to dominate the ecosystem and filled the space left by the extinct ferns and horsetails. It is fascinating that their seeds were in the form of cones the size of a tennis ball, allowing them to spread over significant distances. What is even more astonishing, these trees could grow in the most varied conditions, even in areas where the soil was poor in nutrients. This opened up new possibilities for other forms of life, as coniferous trees served not only as a source of food, but also as a shelter for numerous animals. Their tough bark, protecting against insects and diseases, helped them survive in harsh conditions. As the forests became denser, atmospheric conditions also changed. The oxygen content reached 35%, allowing not only conifers but also many insects to grow to incredible sizes. Dragonflies with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters soared among the dense branches, hunting insects that were also much larger than those of today. But that's not the strangest thing. Some of these coniferous trees formed vast forest complexes where roots intertwined, creating a powerful network that facilitated the exchange of nutrients. Scientists even suggest that such systems might have common mechanisms for protection against diseases, making them true superorganisms. Now imagine that with the development of this forest kingdom, the climate became increasingly diverse. On the south, there were hot, dry zones, and on the north, cold and humid ones, creating ideal conditions for the spread of conifers. And the most incredible thing? These trees became the predecessors of the ecosystems we know today, forming soils and climate that will support life on Earth in the future. At this time, seed-bearing plants emerge, becoming true heroes in the conditions of the Permian climate, where droughts and temperature fluctuations are the norm. These plants, such as ginkgo and conifers, develop seeds that provide protection for the embryos, allowing them to survive in the most challenging conditions. Imagine this. Seeds can remain viable for decades, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. This gives them a significant advantage in the struggle for survival. But that's not all. Seed-bearing plants can reproduce not only through spores but also through seeds, which greatly increases their chances of survival. Seeds have a hard shell that protects them from external influences such as high temperatures and drought. And here's something even more astonishing. Some seeds can only germinate after exposure to fire, using natural disasters as a catalyst for growth. In conditions where competition for resources is high, such adaptations become crucial. For example, coniferous trees like pine can reach heights of up to 30 meters and occupy large areas, creating shade and improving conditions for other plants. These forests become not only homes for many animals, but also form soils that will support future ecosystems. Seed-bearing plants begin to dominate over spore-bearing ones because they are more efficient in utilizing resources such as water and light. Now imagine that the seeds of some coniferous trees can be carried by wind over distances of up to 150 meters. This makes them capable of colonizing new territories that were inaccessible to spore-bearing plants. As a result, seed-bearing plants become the foundation for the formation of forests, where diverse ecosystems are created. And here's what's truly amazing. Some of these forests stretched over thousands of square kilometers, creating entire biomes that will exist for millions of years. The decrease in oxygen levels in the atmosphere became a true catastrophic event for Earth's inhabitants, especially for insects that once dominated ecosystems. Imagine this. Oxygen levels dropped to 21%, whereas they previously stood at 35%. This change led to a significant reduction in the sizes of insects. Do you know what happens when there is not enough oxygen? Insects, which cannot have lungs like mammals, face a real struggle for survival. Their respiratory system, which relies on diffusion of oxygen through the cuticle, could not provide enough gas to maintain large sizes. For instance, dragonflies, which once had wingspans of 80 centimeters, had to adapt. But that's not the strangest part. Some species that previously hunted large prey started feeding on small organisms to compensate for the lack of oxygen. And here's where it gets really bizarre. The decrease in insect sizes not only affected their lives, but also the entire ecosystem. With large predators disappearing, this opened up a niche for new species that couldn't compete with the giants before. What's even more shocking, some scientists claim that climate change and oxygen levels not only contributed to the reduction in insect sizes, but also accelerated the extinction of many species. As a result, by the end of this period, there were many small insects that managed to survive in low oxygen conditions. And here's the craziest part. These tiny creatures changed the entire ecosystem, paving the way for the emergence of new life forms that we see today. For example, flies and termites, which became the main seed dispersers and controllers of organic matter, began to dominate in the new conditions. It's interesting to note that this era marks the beginning of the evolution of insects that can adapt to changing conditions. In different corners of the planet, new species emerged that became the foundation for future ecosystems. It's hard to imagine what Earth would look like if oxygen levels hadn't decreased. But if you think that's all, wait, it gets even more fascinating. For example, some species that survived began to develop unusual adaptations, such as reflective wings and mimicry abilities, to protect themselves from predators. These changes became the basis for the formation of modern ecosystems, where insects still play a key role. Therapsids that lived during this time were true stars of their era, with sizes ranging from small animals with a body length of just 30 centimeters to impressive giants reaching up to 3 meters in length. Their skulls were notable for features such as high and wide foreheads, which allowed them to have a more complex dental structure than their ancestors. The teeth of therapsids resembled those of modern mammals, incisors, canines, and molars. The most fascinating thing? These animals could have different types of teeth adapted for various feeding methods, including herbivores and carnivores. But that's not the strangest part. Some species, like the Dimetrodon, had enormous dorsal fins that could reach 1 meter in height and were used for thermoregulation. Imagine these creatures against the backdrop of their time, with towering forests and vast swamps. These therapsids did not just survive, they dominated ecosystems, adapting to various conditions, including arid regions and wet lowlands. Their limbs, positioned directly beneath their bodies, allowed them to move more efficiently than their ancestors, which contributed to their survival in the struggle for resources. And now, imagine that some of them could even develop fur, resembling modern mammals, providing additional protection from cold. This opens up a whole world of possibilities for studying their behavior and lifestyle. How do you think they communicated with each other? Signs of social behavior among therapsids were quite developed, and some species could form groups for hunting or protection. And here's where it gets really mind-boggling. Fossil finds show that therapsids could develop complex social structures, challenging traditional notions of how early mammals interacted with each other. It's incredible, but in some cases they even occupied burrows, similar to the behavior of modern mammals. And the most shocking thing? Some species, like the Gnathodons, had unique adaptations that allowed them to survive in conditions where the climate was already changing. Their lungs were more efficient, allowing them to breathe more easily as the oxygen level in the atmosphere began to decrease. Therapsids laid the foundation for mammals, and their influence is still felt today. Their adaptations and behaviors formed the basis for the evolution of future species. In this context, it's worth noting that some of these creatures survived in conditions that would seem impossible for most animals. Gorgonops were true predators of their time. They were dubbed the first saber-toothed creatures on the planet. These beings possessed teeth up to 30 centimeters long, which protruded from their jaws like sharp blades. Imagine a predator that could hunt its prey using not only strength but also speed. Gorgonops could reach lengths of up to 2 meters and achieve speeds of up to 7 kilometers per hour. Their robust bodies and powerful limbs allowed them to confidently navigate various landscapes, from dense forests to open plains. But what is truly astonishing, Gorgonops had a unique skull shape that provided them with excellent vision and smell, making them even more effective hunters. Their eyes were positioned in the front of their head, allowing them to accurately gauge the distance to their prey. But that's not the most peculiar thing. The hunting strategies of Gorgonops were highly diverse. They could lie in wait for their prey in ambushes or suddenly attack, using their long teeth to pierce the skin of their victim. These ancient predators also had rough skin, which helped them retain heat in variable climates. Do you know what's even more astonishing? Gorgonops were not the only predators of their time, but their adaptations for hunting and survival made them dominant in the ecosystem. When other species faced difficulties, Gorgonops found solutions through their cunning and adaptability. Their descendants, such as theropods, continued to evolve and develop, but Gorgonops laid the foundation for these future predators. The teeth of Gorgonops were not only their hunting tools, but also symbols of their power in a harsh world. These creatures survived due to their ability to adapt to changing conditions, making them an extraordinary example of evolution. It is interesting that their existence coincided with the appearance of the first mammals, creating a unique dynamic in the ecosystems of that time. If you thought that was all, then it gets even more exciting. Gorgonops also possessed the ability to socialize, enabling them to hunt in groups and increasing their chances of success. But the most intriguing part is that their hunting strategies laid the groundwork for the behavior of many modern mammals. Gorgonops did not just survive. They actively shaped the ecosystem of their time, and their influence is still felt today. The secret to their survival lay not only in their physical characteristics, but also in their intelligence. When you think about ancient predators, remember that Gorgonops were not just ancestors, but true pioneers in the world of predators. While the predatory Gorgonopsids dominated the world, their herbivorous counterparts, the pariasaurs, took the stage. These reptiles, the size of a minivan, had thick skin and powerful jaws adapted for chewing tough vegetation. They could reach lengths of up to 4 meters and weigh up to 600 kilograms. But what's most remarkable about pariasaurs is their unique respiratory system. Their lungs were significantly larger relative to their body size. This allowed them to survive in conditions where the oxygen level in the atmosphere reached 35%, which was nearly 16% higher than today. But how did they adapt to this world filled with predators? The secret lay in their ability to find shelter and use their strength for defense. Pariasaurs not only grazed peacefully, but could also withstand attacks from smaller predators thanks to their massive armor, a thick skin that acted as a shield against bites. Imagine this. Their diet included not only leaves but also harder plants like ferns and gymnosperms that grew everywhere. Scientists even suggest that they might have eaten tree bark, making them some of the first true herbivores in history. What's even more astonishing? Their heads were covered in spines that served both for protection and attracting mates, creating a kind of loud visual signal. These spines could reach lengths of up to 30 centimeters and varied in shape depending on the species. While pariasaurs were at the peak of their evolution, their lives were filled with challenges, including climate change and competition with other herbivores. This led them to colonize new territories where they could find food and shelter. Their spread was possible because they could survive in various conditions, from wet forests to dry plains. But here's the paradox. Despite their strength and capabilities, pariasaurs began to decline, giving way to more adaptable and faster herbivores. Their extinction was linked to climate change and the reduction of suitable habitats. And the most incredible thing, pariasaurs were the ancestors of modern turtles and could have evolved into entirely different creatures if not for the circumstances that led to their extinction. Formation of the supercontinent Pangaea was a true cataclysm for the planet. its area exceeded the combined area of all modern continents. Imagine a world where continents merged into one vast formation, stretching thousands of kilometers. This was not just a geographical process, it fundamentally altered the climate conditions on Earth. The interior regions of Pangaea were so far from the oceans that they experienced sharp temperature fluctuations. Summer heat could reach 35 degrees Celsius, while winter temperatures dropped to -20 degrees. But that's not all. Such changes led to the formation of vast deserts similar to modern Sahara, where annual rainfall was less than 100 millimeters. Now the most incredible part, in places where tropical forests once grew, ecosystems emerged that were completely alien to previous epochs. How could this happen? The merging of continents altered ocean currents, which in turn affected the distribution of moisture across the planet. As a result, the climate became not only more diverse, but also unpredictable. Now imagine that on this supercontinent, giant reptiles roamed, reaching the size of modern buses. Their existence depended on these climatic changes, and such conditions drove their evolution. But how did they cope with the extreme temperature fluctuations? The secret lay in their ability to adapt to new conditions using various strategies. For instance, some species developed special thermoregulatory mechanisms that allowed them to retain heat during cold nights. Did you know that at this time, the ancestors of modern mammals existed, looking completely different from how we know them today? And what's truly remarkable, many of them survived by adapting to the new conditions created by Pangaea. But that's not all. With the movement of continents, a new era will begin, when the climate will change again and life on Earth will take on entirely new forms. In the heart of the supercontinent Pangaea, vast internal continental deserts emerged, and these were not just sand dunes, but entire ecosystems that underwent colossal changes. Imagine expansive landscapes where temperatures soared to 50 degrees Celsius, and rain fell only once every few months, creating conditions where only the most resilient organisms could survive. These deserts covered an area of around 4 million square kilometers, comparable in size to modern deserts like the Sahara. But this is just the beginning. In these conditions, remarkable flora and fauna evolved, adapting to life in extreme environments. For instance, some plants developed thick, fleshy leaves to store water, while animals like early dinosaurs learned to extract water from their food and actively avoided the sun during the hottest hours of the day. Now imagine that beneath this barren surface lay extensive underground waters that served as a source of life for entire ecosystems. Even primitive mammals sought shelter in the shade of rare trees. But this is not the most astonishing part. These deserts were not permanent. They changed shape due to climate fluctuations, and when sea levels rose, many lands were flooded, creating new ecosystems with entirely different life forms. Few know that during these times there was nothing on Earth resembling modern forests. Instead, there were rare oases where life sought its last hope. Among these deserts, giant dinosaurs like theropods, which could reach lengths of over 8 meters, occupied the niche of predators in these harsh conditions. But when the climate began to change and rainy seasons became more frequent, the deserts gradually transformed into greener, more fertile lands, leading to further evolution of species. And here is where things get truly extraordinary. In these oases, entire floras emerged that could change color depending on the time of day, attracting pollinators and creating new ecosystems. This dynamic of life continued until the onset of new geological epochs, changing the face of the planet and leaving traces that scientists still discover today. Geographical changes that occurred during this period served as a catalyst for extraordinary transformations in the world of life. The emergence of the supercontinent Pangaea, whose size was comparable to that of the entire modern Earth, led to a sharp change in climate. This meant that vast territories of the continent were characterized by heat, with humidity ranging from tropical to semi-desert. But that was not all. Due to the isolation of ecosystems, they began to change, and animals that previously freely migrated now found themselves in closed habitats. For example, some amphibian species that previously inhabited water bodies began to develop adaptations that allowed them to survive in conditions of increased heat. Imagine these creatures, the size of a small dog, learning to hide in the shade of large trees to avoid overheating. But how did they cope with the lack of water? The answer is simple. They began to use their skin to retain moisture, leading to the evolution of new species with unique characteristics. At this time, there was also an active change in flora. Giant ferns and conifers, up to 30 meters tall, filled the spaces of Pangaea, forming new ecosystems. It is interesting that all this abundance of life contributed to the development of insects, which began to prey on new plant and animal species. Some of them reached sizes that are difficult to imagine today. For example, dragonflies with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters. And here begins the truly extraordinary. With the appearance of the first reptiles, the ancient ancestors of dinosaurs, a new era of hunting and competition began, in which only the most adapted could survive. At this time, new oceans were already beginning to form on the horizon, creating additional barriers to migration and influencing the genetic isolation of species. Do you know what impact this had on the ecosystem? Some species, such as the ancestors of crocodiles, began to develop special adaptations for life both on land and in water, which gave them unique advantages in the struggle for survival. Each new step in the evolution of the ancestors of modern reptiles was a result of how geographical barriers shaped their destinies. And the most shocking, at the end of this period, the first mammals began to appear on Earth, which would later change the appearance of the entire biosphere. On the planet, catastrophic changes were taking place, and the most shocking thing was that by the end of this period, approximately 95% of all life forms had disappeared. The ecological crisis was growing like a snowball, starting with a sharp change in climate when the Earth's temperature rose to a record high of 36 degrees Celsius. This was a time when oxygen levels dropped sharply to 21%, causing mass extinction of flora and fauna. Many ecosystems were destroyed, and those that survived faced fierce competition for resources. Now imagine that millions of years ago, massive mammals like the Dimetrodon, up to 5 meters long, hunted their competitors in conditions where food was scarce. But this is not the most bizarre thing. In the oceans, where 30-centimeter-long ammonites once thrived, the remaining species faced a sour ocean that destroyed their shells. And here's where it gets truly crazy. Volcanic activity was increasing, spewing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in amounts exceeding all acceptable norms, leading to even more global warming. And here's what's even more shocking. These volcanoes were not ordinary. Their scale was colossal, spewing lava over an area the size of modern-day Texas. Each of these catastrophes created conditions that were intolerable for most beings, and only the most resilient species could adapt to these conditions. At this very time, one of the largest mass extinctions in Earth's history was taking place. As a result, the flora and fauna that once flourished were on the brink of complete extinction. Imagine how small mammals, the size of a modern cat, survived in such conditions, seeking refuge from heat and food scarcity. They crawled across the scorched earth, searching for water that could save their lives. And the most astonishing thing? Less than 1 million years later, life on Earth began to recover, but in a completely new form, where entirely different species dominated. Siberian traps are not just volcanic formations. They are true giants that have reshaped the face of our planet. Imagine this: eruptions spewing lava and gas over an area as large as all of Europe. These catastrophic events began about 240 million years ago and lasted for several million years, leaving behind layers of volcanic rock up to 1,000 meters thick. And the most astonishing part is that these volcanic activities were responsible for one of the most massive extinctions in Earth's history, when more than 95% of all species disappeared. How is this possible? The release of carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere caused dramatic climate changes. Temperatures could drop by tens of degrees, and oxygen in the air became critically scarce. As a result, ecosystems began to collapse and life in the oceans was on the brink of extinction. But that's not all. Imagine vast areas with volcanic craters, such as those that no longer exist on Earth. These craters, some of which are up to 100 kilometers in diameter, became temporary capsules preserving information about life at that time. Scientific expeditions studying these traps find fossilized plants and animals that went extinct millions of years ago, helping us understand how ecosystems recovered after the catastrophe. Now imagine that these eruptions were so powerful that they even led to the formation of vast plateaus, some reaching heights of several hundred meters. The Siberian traps cover an area of more than 1 million square kilometers, and their study continues to this day. But here's what's truly astonishing. These volcanic eruptions occurred during the time when Earth was inhabited by dinosaurs, and they were witnesses to the aftermath of these catastrophes. The Siberian traps remind us of the immense power of natural forces to alter the course of history. And what's truly captivating is that even today, scientists cannot definitively say what caused these eruptions. Some theories point to tectonic plates, others to the influence of asteroids. But one thing is clear, the consequences of these volcanoes continue to affect the climate and ecosystems of Earth, even millions of years later. The first wave of catastrophe began with a sudden increase in temperature, as carbon dioxide gas emitted by volcanoes in the territory of modern Siberia reached concentrations that are even unimaginable today, more than 3,000 parts per million. This created a greenhouse effect that heated the climate by tens of degrees, transforming ecosystems into true hellish conditions. Meanwhile, in the oceans, something astonishing was happening. Oxygen levels were dropping to critically low values, leading to mass die-offs of marine organisms. Imagine this, 35% of all marine animal species disappeared, and this wasn't just simple mollusks, but also majestic ammonites with their spiral shells. But this is not the most peculiar thing. Terrestrial ecosystems were not spared either. Trees as tall as 10-story buildings began to die en masse, and in their place only sparse shrubs appeared. If you thought this was the limit, then things get even more shocking. Volcanic activity led to the release of not only gases but also ash into the atmosphere, which then settled on the ground, creating acidic rains. These rains eroded the soil and plants could not grow normally. Survival became a real game on the edge. How did those who remained survive? At that time, some species adapted to the new conditions, but most did not manage to adapt to the rapid changes. As a result, almost 95% of all species on the planet went extinct, leaving only small islands of life that were subsequently colonized by new, more resilient species. What is even more shocking? These events paved the way for the appearance of dinosaurs, which then dominated the planet for millions of years. But let's talk in more detail about how exactly they managed to occupy these niches. Imagine an ocean where up to 96% of marine species disappear in mere moments. Yes, this truly happened during the Permian-Triassic extinction event. How could this be possible? The causes lie in a combination of catastrophic factors: volcanic activity, climate change, and even changes in atmospheric oxygen levels. For instance, the eruptions on the territory of modern-day Siberia created vast lava fields, larger than the area of France. These volcanoes released carbon dioxide, which in turn led to global warming. The ocean temperature rose by 10 degrees Celsius, causing mass die-offs of marine organisms. But that's not all. The oxygen levels in the water dropped to critically low levels, making the survival of marine inhabitants practically impossible. As a result, Coral reefs, which were home to millions of species, were destroyed, and up to 90% of all marine forms of life simply disappeared. And what about terrestrial vertebrates? They did not survive this catastrophe either. 70% of them perished, and this is not just a statistic. It means that many groups of animals, such as amphibians and reptiles, were on the brink of extinction. Massive changes in ecosystems led to the disappearance of familiar food chains. Additionally, herbivorous animals like Dilophosaurus were unable to adapt to the new conditions, leading to their extinction. But what is truly astonishing? Due to these catastrophic changes on Earth, the way was opened for the evolution of dinosaurs who soon dominated the planet. How exactly did this happen? This remarkable intersection of factors and conditions prepared the stage for the appearance of new, dominant species. Just imagine, when many ecosystems were destroyed, others began to develop, filling the voids and creating new niches. Ultimately, this extinction event served as a catalyst for future forms of life that forever changed the face of the planet. One of the most shocking consequences of the mass extinction was the appearance of what are known as dead zones in the oceans, which covered vast areas of the seafloor devoid of oxygen and, consequently, life. Imagine entire regions that once teemed with life now becoming desolate, lifeless landscapes stretching over thousands of square kilometers. Research shows that during certain periods, the oxygen content in the oceans dropped to critically low levels, sometimes down to 5% of normal. In such conditions, only the most resilient species could survive, but even they could not withstand such an ecological catastrophe for long. Now imagine that at the same time, the surface of the ocean was being pounded by acid rains, containing sulfuric and carbonic acids, which were formed due to volcanic activity and carbon dioxide emissions. These rains could lower the pH of the water to levels incompatible with life for most marine organisms. Shockingly, some dying coral species could not adapt to this change, and their numbers were reduced to zero in certain regions. Imagine how these acid rains eroded the coastlines, destroying ecosystems that had supported life for millions of years. As a result, during a time when life on land was already under immense stress, the oceans were also experiencing catastrophic changes. What is even more shocking, scientific research indicates that these dead zones and acid rains were one of the main factors that prevented most of the species that existed at the time from surviving. Do you want to know how this affected life on Earth in the future? The atmosphere on the planet underwent a radical change during the Permian-Triassic extinction event. The oxygen level dropped to 21%, while carbon dioxide levels skyrocketed to 2,000 parts per million. It was as if breathing became much more difficult, as oxygen levels were halved compared to today. These changes occurred due to massive volcanic eruptions that erupted with catastrophic force in the area of modern-day Siberia. Imagine the magma and gases being expelled into the atmosphere, creating clouds of toxic sulfur dioxide that led to acid rain and the formation of dead zones in the oceans. The question arises, how could this have happened? It turns out that over millions of years, volcanic activity released enough carbon dioxide to cause a greenhouse effect, raising Earth's temperature by 10 degrees Celsius. This sudden temperature increase caused the oceans to heat up, leading to the mass extinction of marine organisms. But that's not all. Toxic gases began to accumulate in the atmosphere, making life on land equally challenging. As a result, many species, including amphibians and reptiles, were on the brink of extinction. Can you imagine what life was like at that time? Trees that once reached 30 meters in height lost their leaves, and the diversity of animals sharply decreased. Additionally, ecosystems began to change, as only the most adaptable organisms survived. And then came the moment when the amount of carbon in the atmosphere reached its historical peak, 250,000 parts per million, which is twice the current levels. How could plants cope with such conditions? The answer lies in their ability to photosynthesize, which became incredibly efficient, in the presence of increased carbon dioxide. But there's more to the story. It was during this time that the first ancestors of mammals appeared, adapting to the new conditions. What's most astonishing? Their survival laid the foundation for the evolution of modern mammals, and it was during this period that the basis for the future diversity of life on the planet was established. After the Permian-Triassic extinction, when only a few organisms survived on Earth, the ancestors of future dinosaurs and mammals emerged, marking a true evolutionary revolution. Imagine a landscape once filled with giant trees and a multitude of species, now resembling a desert where only a few could adapt to the new conditions. These were small reptiles the size of cats that began hunting small invertebrates and surviving in the harsh competition. They could hide in burrows and move quickly across the surface, giving them an advantage over larger predators left behind. The most fascinating part: these reptiles, which would become the ancestors of dinosaurs, began developing unique adaptations. Some learned to walk on two legs, while others remained four-legged. During this time, mammals also appeared, looking like small, furry creatures with highly developed senses. Some began to regulate their body temperature, allowing them to hunt and defend themselves more effectively. But there's more. Among the survivors were those that began developing fur, enabling them to survive in changing climates. Did you know some of these mammals could reach lengths of up to 1 meter? Impressive, isn't it? And here's where it gets even more extraordinary. These creatures had a unique ability to reproduce, allowing them to quickly restore their populations after losses. In less than 10 million years after the extinction, Earth was already home to the most diverse groups of animals, including the first ancestors of modern mammals and reptiles that would soon become dinosaurs. And the most intriguing part? These mammals began to develop social behavior, which laid the foundation for the complex group structures we see in modern animals. For example, they started hunting together, making it easier to capture prey. Meanwhile, the ancestors of dinosaurs, with their incredible flexibility and adaptability, began to occupy new niches, and by the end of this period, Earth was firmly established with species that would become the true giants of the planet. And which of these groups turned out to be the most successful? The answer is shocking. These small mammals, in essence, were laying the groundwork for the future diversity we see today. By the time the ecosystem underwent massive changes, the world was filled with creatures that couldn't adapt to the new conditions. This extinction, which affected more than 90% of all species on Earth, opened the door for entirely new groups of animals. Imagine millions of years of evolution being wiped off the map, leaving behind empty ecosystems ready for colonization. And then the first dinosaurs appeared. Small but agile, they began to fill the ecological niches left by the vanished giants. Initially, they were only a few dozen centimeters in size, but even then they possessed unique adaptations that allowed them to hunt and survive in the changed conditions. At the same time, the first mammals appeared, starting to develop towards a nocturnal lifestyle. What's even more shocking, these mammals eventually became the ancestors of all modern mammals, including us. But that's not all. In this time, the first flying reptiles also appeared, which began to hunt insects that reached 30 centimeters in size. These flying creatures, resembling modern bats, had a wingspan of up to 1 meter and were able to soar over forests full of fresh possibilities. The air was 35% oxygen, allowing these creatures to develop in ways we can't even imagine. But with each new generation, dinosaurs became increasingly diverse, from herbivores weighing up to 10 tons to predators hunting in packs. And that's where it gets really crazy. Some of them developed such extraordinary hunting strategies that they could kill creatures twice their size. For example, theropods up to 6 meters long were true monsters of their time, hunting other dinosaurs with incredible agility and speed. But, as you can understand, survival became a real game. At every step, dangers lurked, from predators to sudden climate changes. And what's even more insane, These changes led to some species becoming true predators, hunting their own kind to ensure their survival in the face of competition. Evolution, as never before, was racing at a breakneck pace, and every new adaptation became a key to survival in this new, harsh world. What do you think happened to these creatures when the time for change came? The extinction event that occurred at the end of the Permian period was a catastrophic event that transformed the face of the Earth. The loss of more than 97% of all marine species and up to 75% of terrestrial creatures left a void that new species had to fill. This mass extinction created ideal conditions for the expansion of reptiles during the Triassic period. The recovery of ecosystems began with the appearance of the first mammals and ancient reptiles, which started to occupy niches previously held by larger creatures. For instance, it was during this time that the ancestors of lizards appeared, who would later dominate the land. But why did reptiles become the main players on this new stage? The reason is that their anatomy and physiology were perfectly adapted to the changed conditions. They mastered the ability to retain water, allowing them to survive in hot and arid conditions. It is interesting that some of the earliest reptiles, such as archosaurs, possessed unique characteristics. Their lungs worked much more efficiently than those of their ancestors, allowing them to breathe even in low oxygen conditions. Imagine these creatures could reach lengths of up to 30 meters. As their sizes grew, they became increasingly diverse. Did you know that some of them even began to adapt to aquatic environments? This astonishing discovery shows how quickly evolution could adapt to new conditions, creating a diversity of life forms. But this is not the most surprising. During this time, reptiles such as the ancestors of dinosaurs began to develop characteristics that would later make them invincible. For example, some species developed powerful hind legs, allowing them to reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, which was not possible for most of their ancestors. Knowing that such changes occurred just a few million years after the catastrophe, it is astonishing how quickly life on the planet adapted to new conditions. What is even more astonishing is that the appearance of new ecosystems and species occurred not only on land, but also in the seas. It was during this time that the first marine reptiles, such as plesiosaurs, began to appear, reaching lengths of up to 12 meters. Their long necks and powerful tails made them formidable predators in the oceans. But what is truly shocking is that they were able to compete with enormous marine reptiles that survived in conditions where oxygen was scarcer than ever before. Each of these steps in evolution led to reptiles dominating the planet for the next millions of years, changing the appearance of the Earth and its ecosystems. And the most incredible thing? These changes occurred against the backdrop of constant climate changes that could have wiped out less adapted species, but reptiles were ready to face any challenges. Imagine a world where primitive archosaurs, the ancestors of dinosaurs, began to dominate the planet. These reptiles did not merely exist, they invented new ways to survive and adapt, making them formidable predators of their time. The earliest members of this group, such as archosaurs, could reach lengths of up to 5 meters and had powerful jaws that enabled them to hunt other animals. Their teeth were sharp as a razor and perfectly suited for tearing flesh. But that's not the most astonishing part. Some of these creatures, like the heterodonts, had unique adaptations that allowed them to survive in the harshest conditions. What's even more shocking? These reptiles could reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, making them some of the fastest creatures on the planet at the time. Their anatomy featured unique characteristics, lungs that allowed them to breathe more efficiently and limbs adapted for rapid movement across various terrains. For instance, some archosaurs had long and slender legs, enabling them to run quickly across open spaces and avoid predators. Now imagine this. Their skin was covered in hard scales that served as armor. These reptiles began to diversify and their numbers increased, creating a true ecosystem where each species sought its niche. How could they adapt so quickly? The secret lay in their ability to change their behavior and lifestyle in response to their environment. For example, some species began to hunt in packs, increasing their chances of success. But that's not all. Archosaurs developed social structures that allowed them to defend themselves more effectively against threats. What's even more remarkable, these creatures developed various types of behavior that enabled them to survive in conditions of intense competition. In their world, both predators and herbivorous archosaurs coexisted, using their adaptations to avoid attacks. For instance, some had powerful hind legs that allowed them to quickly escape from pursuers. But even in this world, things were not so simple. Climate changes and shifts in ecosystems posed threats to them. These reptiles faced numerous challenges, and it was during this period that their evolution began, leading to the emergence of dinosaurs. And here's the most astonishing fact. Some archosaurs could survive in conditions where the oxygen level in the atmosphere was significantly higher than today, reaching up to 35%, allowing them to grow to incredible sizes. After the Permian-Triassic extinction event, when the planet experienced one of the most massive mass extinctions, ecosystems began to slowly recover. Imagine barren landscapes where diverse forms of life once thrived. Now, silence and the absence of biological connections reigned. However, something remarkable happened. Just a few million years later, life began to return to these desolate lands. In the Triassic period that followed this catastrophe, new plant and animal species adapted to the changed conditions. For instance, seeds of coniferous trees, which could germinate in arid conditions, began to fill the space left by the extinct species. Conifers not only survived, but dominated, creating forests that stretched for thousands of kilometers. But that's not all. Among these forests, the first archosaurs began to appear, which would later become the ancestors of dinosaurs. Picture small archosaurs the size of a cat, hunting insects and small animals, exploring new ecosystems. But the most astonishing part is that some of these creatures evolved so rapidly that within just a few million years, they grew larger than the largest mammals of today. This was possible due to the warm climate and high levels of carbon dioxide, which promoted rapid plant growth. At that time, there was twice as much carbon dioxide as there is now, allowing plants to grow faster and more extensively than we can imagine. And when you think that's the limit, imagine that among these ancient forests there could be archosaurs over 10 meters long, using their sharp teeth to hunt herbivores that also began to populate these new ecosystems. What an incredible rate of adaptation! And here's what's even more amazing. These ecosystems continued to change, and the first mammals began to appear. Although they were small, they laid the foundation for future giants like mammoths and dinosaurs. While giant plants reaching heights of up to 60 meters dominated the Earth, ecosystems were preparing the ground for the emergence of the first dinosaurs. These vast forests filled with ferns and conifers created oxygen conditions that were twice as high as modern levels. Imagine breathing in an oxygen chamber. On one hand, these conditions fostered the growth of multi-meter-long insects, while on the other, they facilitated the formation of complex food chains that later allowed dinosaurs to dominate the planet. These plants, with their hard bark and powerful roots, not only provided food for herbivores, but also served as shelter for numerous creatures. What is even more astonishing? These forests were so dense that their shadows could conceal entire ecosystems, and in their shadows reptiles crawled that later evolved into true giants. Evolution of these creatures was possible because, in the conditions of abundant oxygen and high humidity, even the smallest and weakest species could survive and adapt. Now imagine what happened after the catastrophe known as the Permian-Triassic extinction. Around 95% of all species went extinct, opening up new opportunities. The giant plants that survived allowed new species to quickly occupy the vacated niches. As a result, the reptiles that were once merely prey began to evolve into dinosaurs that dominated the planet for over 170 million years. This process was not random. In the changed climate and new ecological conditions, dinosaurs could reach sizes that were previously impossible. For example, the largest ones, such as the Argentinosaurus, could reach lengths of 30 meters and weigh up to 100 tons. What makes this even more fascinating? These giants appeared against the backdrop of a plant world that had been evolving for millions of years, conducting experiments with sizes and forms of life.